let's go back to our project, and inside main.tf, we can configure Terraform to store file remotely, and it's actually very easy. So Terraform block is basically for configuring metadata and information about Terraform itself. So something that we can define here is required version, for example, which has to be greater than 0.12. And another attribute is backend. So backend is the remote backend for Terraform, and one of the remote storages for Terraform state file is S3 bucket. And S3 bucket is basically a storage, a very simple storage in AWS that is mostly used for storing files. And this is basically what we can configure for Terraform. And inside that we have a couple of attributes. We have the bucket name. Let's call it my app bucket. And obviously we have to create this bucket because it doesn't exist yet. Then we have the key. The key is basically the path inside our bucket that we're going to create. And this can have a folder structure, basically, like a folder hierarchy structure. So let's do my app state.tfstate. So with these two configuration attributes, we can actually define that Terraform state should be stored inside the S3 bucket, which has this name as a file called state.tfstate. So as I said, we first have to create a bucket, of course, because it doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to head back to AWS and let's go to S3 service. And as you see, when I switch to the S3 service, the region actually disappears and I have global. And so let's actually create a bucket here. And region is Paris EU West 3, automatically set. And the bucket name should be the one that we are referencing. And if we scroll down, we have a couple of more data that we can configure for this bucket. One of them is blocking public access. So basically you can't open these files in a browser, which makes sense because we want to protect our state files, and we will be able to access them obviously using AWS credentials. So let's leave it checked. Another thing we have is bucket versioning. This basically creates a versioning of the files that we are storing in the bucket. So every time a file content changes, a new version is created, right? So you basically end up with a bunch of files that, very similar to Git repository, you have files that are versioned because you have a history of the changes. And it actually is a good practice to enable bucket versioning for your Terraform state file, because if something happens and the up-to-date latest version of your state file basically gets messed up, or somebody accidentally messes something up in the state file, then you still can go back to the previous state. So it's good for the backup practice. So we can enable that one. But of course, it means that you end up with much more files in the bucket. You also have server-side encryption for additional security and so on. So with this configuration, we can create the bucket. And there you go, we have the bucket. And currently our bucket is empty. There are no objects inside because we haven't uploaded any files. And another thing that we can configure here is the region. And in our case, because our bucket is actually in a specific region, we can hard code it because this is not going to change. And also it doesn't have to be the same region as the one that we're creating our resources in, because it's just for storing the data. So it doesn't matter which region that's in. And with this configuration, basically Terraform will create the state file inside the bucket called my app bucket, and then it will keep updating that Terraform state file inside the bucket every time something changes. So our configuration for Terraform backend is done. So let's actually apply this configuration with the remote storage. And note that I have all my resources running in AWS. So if I check out the Terraform state, I actually have the server and VPC and all of them still on AWS, which is an interesting use case because we're gonna basically switch the storage backend from a non-empty state file, right? We already have resources, and that state that we have locally needs to be basically moved to this remote S3 bucket storage. So the first thing we need to do before we apply Terraform is Terraform init, because every time you add or you change Terraform configuration, like backend, for example, you have to do Terraform init. So we need to do that first. So let's do Terraform init and let's see what happens. And here you see initializing the backend. So this is the part that we changed. And this is the part where Terraform is asking us what to do with this new storage, right? So Terraform has detected that we have an existing state, a non-empty state right here. So we're migrating from local backend to S3 backend. And Terraform is asking us whether we want to migrate our local state to the remote state on S3. So we're going to type here yes, because that's what we want. And successfully configured the backend S3. So Terraform initialized successfully. Now if we go back to AWS, to our S3 bucket right here, and if we click inside, here we have this folder-like structure. So we have my app, and inside that my app folder, we have state.tf state file. And this is where the Terraform state now is stored. So back in our editor, if I open the Terraform tf state file, you see that everything is basically cleared up. So I don't have anything here. All of that has been migrated to this file right here. And if I click inside, this is the object URL. However, we have actually blocked access from browser to it, so we can only basically get it using AWS credentials. However, if you want to check the contents of the file, you can basically just download it. And here is our current Terraform state. So now, whenever we make changes to our Terraform configuration, we update stuff in here, we add new resources, basically all of that state will be managed and updated inside that state.tf state file, right? So we're not going to have anything locally. And that means when other developers or CI/CD pipeline basically executes Terraform commands, all of those Terraform commands will be accessing the same shared Terraform state file. So it will make it easier to collaborate on that. So we can try one last thing here. So if I do Terraform state list, I should be able to get all these resources that are stored in our tf state file in the S3 bucket. So let's execute. And there you go, Terraform is fetching the state from my app bucket because we don't have any state locally. So this is how you can configure a remote backend to safely store and also share Terraform state.